The summons came just after noon. Victor's assistant poked her head into my cubicle and said, "He wants you." Now, my stomach clenched, but I pushed back my chair, straightened my blazer, and walked the long stretch of carpet toward his corner office. Victor Drayton sat behind glass walls on the 28th floor, the skyline of Manhattan gleaming behind him. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "We're restructuring," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your salary will be cut by 45%. Be grateful or leave." I kept my expression steady, though inside I felt as if he'd slapped me. 4 years of late nights, sacrificed weekends, fixing his mistakes, and this was my reward. I forced a smile, not because I agreed, but because I knew anger would give him satisfaction. He grabbed a stack of reports and tossed them onto the table. Papers fanned across the polished surface, one sheet sliding farther than the rest. I reached to gather them, and my eyes froze on the page. My signature was at the bottom of a contract tied to an investor presentation I had never seen, much less approved. My heart pounded. Either someone had forged it, or Victor had. "Consider yourself lucky, Mariana," he said, waving me off like a nuisance. Half this office would kill for the chance to stay. I picked up the papers, slipped the forged contract back into the stack, and walked out under the buzz of fluorescent lights. Fury and suspicion clashed inside me, tightening my chest with every step toward my desk. That night, in our modest apartment in Brooklyn, I spread the papers across the kitchen table. My sister Renee, still in scrubs from her shift at the hospital, listened quietly. When I showed her the contract, her face hardened. "If he's willing to use your name, what else is he hiding?" Rain tapped against the window. I stood there, watching water blur the city lights, the forged signature burning in my mind. A pay cut was one thing. Being turned into Victor's scapegoat was another, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of something darker. The next morning, I sat at my desk staring at the gray glow of my monitor, the hum of the office heavy in my ears. 4 years I had given to Orion, and with a single sentence, Victor had reduced my worth by nearly half. I thought about the things I had surrendered for this job. The day of my mother's surgery, when I should have been holding her hand. I was here polishing a client report, one Christmas Eve, when Renee was waiting at home with candles lit. I sat alone at my desk, sending out projections to meet a deadline no one remembered in January. And then there were the times I had covered for Victor himself. I remembered one meeting when he forgot to include compliance details in a presentation. I had stayed all night rebuilding the report, saving him from humiliation, saving Orion from sanctions. Not once did he thank me. Now, around me, the office buzzed with whispers. Colleagues kept their eyes glued to screens, fingers tapping keys in a rhythm that felt forced, as if pretending to be indispensable might spare them. In the cafeteria, the absence of Sonia Trevino hit me like a hollow note. She used to bring trays of warm empanadas, her laughter filling the room. She had been loyal, too, and still she was erased with one swift stroke. Back home, I dug through a box of old pay stubs and notes, pages of overtime hours marked in red, weekends where my signature sat at the bottom of endless spreadsheets. I traced the numbers with my finger, whispering to myself, for what to be disposable. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. The forged contract loomed over everything, its false signature like a ticking clock. If Victor had already used my name to shield his failures, what else was he willing to do? My livelihood was at stake, yes, but so was something deeper, my very identity, my reputation, the one thing I couldn't rebuild once shattered. And as I closed the box, a single truth pressed down on me. I needed to find out what he was hiding before it was too late. By the time I reached the office the next morning, the air felt different. The usual chatter by the coffee machine had vanished, replaced by low murmurs and quick glances. Callista, the nervous intern with freckles across her nose, leaned close as I poured my coffee. "Vendors haven't been paid in months," she whispered, eyes darting toward the hallway. "My uncle runs one of them. He said Orion owes thousands." She bit her lip and hurried away before anyone could notice us talking. Not long after, Devin from compliance pulled me aside near the printer. His voice was heavy, defeated. "They downgraded our health benefits overnight. My wife's medication isn't covered anymore." He shook his head, and I saw something in his eyes, resignation, like he already knew he was standing on a trapdoor waiting to fall. Victor's door opened and slammed shut in frantic rhythm all day. He shuffled between conference rooms, phone pressed to his ear, forehead glistening, through a half-closed door. I caught a glimpse of his desk. Bold letters screamed across an email subject line. "Investor unrest." His hand slammed the laptop shut as if he'd felt me looking. Later, in the corridor, two managers didn't realize I was within earshot. One muttered, "If investors walk, Orion's finished." The words sank into me like a stone into deep water. That night, the subway swayed as I scribbled in my notebook, the tunnel lights flashing past. Forged contract, pay cuts, investor unrest, who benefits, slowly. A pattern emerged. Victor wasn't just cruel, he was desperate, and I was the name he planned to use as his shield when it all crumbled. When I got home, Renee was waiting at the kitchen table. She glanced at the spreadsheets on my screen, then at my tired face. "He's not just cutting pay. Mari, he's collapsing the floor under you. You need to step aside before he pulls you down with him." I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection faint in the black screen. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. Or I pull the floor out from under him first. Friday evening, as people packed their bags and hurried for the elevators, Victor's assistant appeared at my cubicle. "He wants you," she said. Her tone clipped. I walked the familiar hallway, each step heavier than the last. Victor didn't look up when I entered. He was typing furiously, the glow of his screen reflected in his glasses. "Without preamble," he said, "I'll need you to prepare a new investor update this weekend. Clean, optimistic, polished, use your name." His voice was sharp, transactional, as if he were ordering takeout. The audacity hit me like a slap. He'd already carved away nearly half my salary, forged my signature, and now he wanted me to be the smiling mask for his fraud. My jaw tightened, but I stayed silent, giving only the smallest nod. He dismissed me with a wave, already returning to his keyboard. I walked out of his office, the city's skyline framed behind him, and thought about how little it mattered to him if I drowned. By the time I pushed through the lobby doors, thunder split the air. Rain came down in sheets, drenching the sidewalks, hammering against glass towers. I had no umbrella within blocks. My blouse clung to me, mascara bleeding into dark streaks down my cheeks. People rushed past with umbrellas like shields, while I let the storm soak me through. At home in Brooklyn, I dropped my wet shoes by the door and sat at the kitchen table. Bills fanned across the counter, rent overdue, pharmacy receipts, notices from the clinic. Renee came in from her shift, her scrubs damp from the storm. She looked at the bills, then at me. "He thinks I'll take this because I can't afford to lose the job," I whispered, my voice brittle. Renee leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "Then prove him wrong." Something inside me broke. No, not broke. Sharpened. Cold clarity cut through exhaustion. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to stay. I was going to fight back. And for the first time in years, I felt steady as steel. I poured coffee, spread papers across the table, and began mapping Victor's lies. The apartment was silent except for the steady hum of my laptop fan. I'd locked myself in for the weekend, determined to follow every thread Victor had tried to bury. I opened archived reports, traced expense sheets, and compared them against meeting minutes I had saved out of habit. Then I saw it. A proposal submitted to investors last quarter, my name attached at the bottom. The words leapt off the page, recommended 45% salary reductions as part of cost optimization strategy. My pulse pounded in my ears. He hadn't just cut me down, he'd cast me as the executioner. If this document held every ruined paycheck, every desperate family member of an employee would look at me as the one who swung the blade. My reputation wouldn't just be damaged, it would be annihilated. No firm would ever trust me again. I went deeper, line by line, invoices that didn't exist, earnings inflated by double digits, client retention percentages massaged into fairy tales. The numbers glittered like glass, but underneath was only sand. It was a house of cards, and Victor had taped my name across the bottom layer to hold it up. I leaned back, pressing my palms into my eyes until colors burst in the dark. Rage gave me clarity. He wanted me to be the scapegoat when it collapsed. He wanted my credibility to buffer his fraud. Renee found me Saturday night, hunched over the kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and scribbled notes. She set down a bowl of soup I hadn't asked for and studied my face. "How far will you go?" she asked softly. I lifted my eyes from the screen. Whatever exhaustion lingered was gone. In its place was fire. "As far as it takes to make him regret underestimating me." Renee nodded slowly, like she knew there was no pulling me back from the edge I'd stepped onto. I turned back to the screen, fingers flying, gathering everything I needed. Each number I saved, each email I archived, felt less like paperwork and more like ammunition. By Sunday morning, I wasn't drowning anymore. I was loading the first bullet. By Sunday morning, the floor of my apartment looked like a war room. Papers covered every inch of the kitchen table. Sticky notes lined the walls. My laptop balanced on a stack of unopened bills. But the chaos had shape now, a sharp purpose. 2 envelopes sat side by side in the center of the table. The first held my professional analysis page after page, proving that Victor's so-called cost savings weren't just harsh, they were mathematically impossible. The second was heavier, packed with screenshots, invoices, emails, and cross-reference notes, all addressed to Orion's investors and board members. It wasn't just a file, it was a mirror, waiting to show them everything Victor had tried to hide. Still, I needed more than paper. That afternoon, I met Helena Moretti at a quiet cafe tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore in Midtown. Years ago, I had helped her navigate a compliance tangle that could have cost her millions. She hadn't forgotten. She arrived with her scarf pulled high against the wind, but her eyes were alert. I laid out the dossier in front of her. She read quickly, her brows knitting deeper with each page. When she finally looked up, her voice was low but firm. "If you can prove this, you won't just save your name. You might save our capital." "Do you realize what you're holding?" "I do," I said, my hand steady on the table. She nodded, slipping a copy into her bag. "Deliver the full set to the board tomorrow morning. I'll be watching. And Mariana, be careful. Truth cuts both ways." Back home, I smoothed the deep blue blouse I hadn't worn in years, the one that always made me feel taller, sharper. I placed both envelopes neatly in my bag and zipped it closed. For the first time in months, my heartbeat wasn't frantic, it was steady. Standing at the window, I whispered to my reflection, "Tomorrow, the mask falls," and with the storm clouds clearing over the city, I knew I was ready to watch it shatter. Monday morning. The air in Orion's office felt like a vacuum. Desks were filled, but no one spoke above a whisper, as though sound itself might trigger another round of cuts. I arrived early, placed envelope 1 carefully on Victor's chair, and sat down at my desk with my coffee. My pulse was steady. At 9 sharp, Victor strode through the glass doors, wearing his usual smirk, as if the storm clouds gathering around him were just in my imagination. The illusion cracked 5 minutes later. His door flew open, and he stormed into the open office, waving my analysis like a flag of war. His face was red, his voice sharp enough to cut. This says it would take 3 employees to handle the workload. Impossible. I rose from my chair, letting every eye in the room turn toward me. My voice was clear, deliberate. Exactly. That's why 3 people were doing it before. You can't make one body cover 3. A ripple went through the office. Phones clicked. Screens lit up. Colleagues who had been pretending not to notice now leaned forward, watching like an audience waiting for a verdict. Victor's eyes darted across the room. He hissed at me through clenched teeth. "Lower your voice." But I lifted mine, firm and measured. Unless you can explain how one analyst can manage 18 client portfolios, reconcile 6 legacy systems, and file daily compliance reports that take 4 hours each, this is fraud. You're demanding the impossible and calling it efficiency. Gasps. Fingers tapped at phone screens. Some discreet, others bold. The sound of recording apps being opened filled the silence between my words. Victor's jaw worked furiously, the paper shaking in his fist. Then he grabbed my arm, not roughly, but hard enough to make his desperation clear, and pulled me toward his office. He slammed the door behind us, cutting off the buzz of whispers and the faint, tinny sound of someone replaying my words on a phone. He turned on me, eyes wild, veins visible at his temple. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And I reached calmly into my bag for envelope 2. Victor paced behind his desk like a caged animal, his face twisted with fury. "You're finished, Mariana," he sneered, slamming my analysis onto the wood. "You think you can humiliate me out there? You've signed your own termination." I slid my hand into my bag, the smooth edges of envelope 2 cool against my fingers. Calmly, I placed it on his desk and pushed it toward him. "Already sent," I said evenly. "The investors have it now." For the first time since I'd known him, Victor froze. His skin seemed to pale in real time, his lips parting without words. What did you? It's every mistake you've made." I interrupted. "Every lie you told, every report you forged, every complaint you buried, all documented, all traceable." He recovered just enough to spit out threats. "I'll sue you. I'll blacklist you in every firm in the city. You won't get a job scrubbing books for a non-profit." I leaned forward, voice low but sharp as a blade. "You can't sue without discovery. Do you really want the board reading depositions about your fraud? Do you want Orion's investors testifying about how you misled them?" His mouth opened, then closed again. The sound of his power crumbling was almost audible, and then the door swung open. 2 investor representatives stepped inside, crisp suits still damp from the rain. They didn't acknowledge Victor. Their eyes went straight to me. "Mariana," one of them said, "walk us through your assessment. What recovery options do we have if we move forward without Drayton's plan?" Victor blinked, as though he'd just been erased from his own office. He tried to speak, but no sound came. I answered their questions clearly, methodically, laying out timelines, budgets, and realistic pathways forward. My voice filled the space where his once did. By the time I finished, the investors were nodding, already taking notes. Victor sat slumped in his chair, invisible in the room that used to orbit him. And I, for the first time, felt the center of gravity shift firmly to me. By noon, I sat across from an HR representative, sliding a neat stack of papers across her desk. My resignation letter rested on top, followed by handover notes so detailed they could guide anyone through my projects without missing a step. Every process documented, every deadline accounted for. I refused to leave chaos behind. Integrity was the only thing I carried that Victor couldn't touch. The HR manager skimmed the documents, her brows lifting slightly. "This is thorough," she murmured, but I was already rising from my chair. Back on the main floor, word had spread like fire through dry brush. Heads lifted as I walked past. I caught whispers, fragments of conversations. She did it. The investors saw everything. Drayton's done. Screens flickered with emails racing across the building, the tremor of a scheme unraveling. By the time I reached the lobby, colleagues approached one by one. Some hugged me quickly, others pressed my hand, whispering thanks they couldn't dare say aloud upstairs. Their faces held exhaustion, but also a spark of relief, as if for the first time they saw proof that resistance was possible. The revolving doors opened to the city outside. The storm had passed, the streets glistened under a fragile sun. The air smelled of wet pavement and something new possibility. On the curb, Helena Moretti was waiting. Her posture confident, her smile measured. She extended her hand, and when I shook it, I felt the weight of choice shift entirely. "We're with you," she said simply. "Let's build something better." Behind the glass facade of Orion's tower, I caught sight of Victor. He stood frozen, pale and hollow, his eyes locked on the investors he'd courted now walking at my side. For a moment, it almost looked as if he didn't believe what he was seeing, that the woman he tried to cut down had become the one everyone followed. I straightened my shoulders and stepped into the light, ready for what came next. 6 months later, I sat at the head of a long walnut table in a modest midtown office. The walls weren't lined with art or glass awards, just whiteboards filled with plans, deadlines, and sticky notes. The branch we had built under investor backing was small, but it was alive. Our team rotated workloads fairly. No one buried beneath impossible demands. When someone stumbled, the rest caught them. We celebrated small victories with takeout boxes and laughter that echoed down the hallways. I worked longer hours than ever, but every day felt earned, not stolen. Victor's shadow lingered sometimes. His name came up in industry chatter, usually followed by silence and a shake of the head. He had resigned quietly, his reputation scarred. LinkedIn profile stripped down to bland phrases. Once, people had hung on his every word. Now, they barely remembered him. One afternoon, rushing to catch a train at Grand Central, I ducked into a cafe for a quick coffee. Standing in line, I spotted him, bearded, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. For a heartbeat, I thought of walking out, but he turned, saw me, and nodded. "You proved me wrong," he said softly. There was no venom, no challenge, just surrender. For the first time, I felt no anger, no urge to wound him further, only closure. I nodded back, and we both went on with our lives. That night, I stood on the balcony of our Brooklyn apartment. Renee laughed in the kitchen with our mother, the sound carrying through the open door. The city stretched before me, lights flickering like a constellation I had finally learned how to read. I whispered to myself, not as a battle cry, but as a truth I'd earned. The best revenge was never destruction. It was creation. They cut my pay, but I built my worth. And with the night breeze curling around me, I felt steady, certain, and finally free.